The granite in the Great Pyramid, if you look at the famous King's Chamber, its walls and its roof are, the ceiling of the King's Chamber are all made with gigantic granite blocks.
Deep inside the Great Pyramid lie massive blocks of granite, shaped with a level of precision that, according to everything we know, should not have been possible 4,000 years ago. The official explanation is surprisingly simple. Ancient Egyptian craftsmen supposedly cut and shaped these stones using soft copper tools and ordinary sand. But there's one problem. Granite is one of the hardest natural stones on Earth, and the tool marks carved into it don't seem to match the tools we were told created them. So if copper couldn't do this, who did? I think we're looking again at a lost technology, and it was this ancient apocalypse 12,800 years ago that wiped that from the human memory banks. Author and researcher Graham Hancock followed these mysterious cut marks from the Great Pyramid into forgotten quarries, hidden tombs, and sealed chambers. What he found raises a question that archaeologists and engineers are still debating today. What if the greatest mystery of ancient Egypt isn't who built the pyramids, but how they worked granite with such astonishing precision? Before we uncover the evidence, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because on this channel we explore the world's greatest historical mysteries, lost civilizations, and discoveries that challenge everything we think we know. Now, let's examine the stone that refuses to fit the official story. The stone that refused to cooperate, granite, is not just another building stone. It is one of the toughest natural materials on Earth. On the Mohs hardness scale, it ranks around 6 to 7, while diamond, the hardest natural substance, stands at 10. The principle is straightforward. A tool generally needs to be harder than the material it is cutting. If it isn't, the tool wears away long before the stone does. That's why the traditional explanation raises so many questions. For decades, we've been told that the ancient Egyptians shaped enormous granite monuments using soft copper tools together with sand as an abrasive. But imagine trying to carve a solid rock with something barely harder than soft metal. The tool would wear out long before the granite showed much sign of being cut. So how did an ancient civilization, supposedly equipped with little more than copper, manage to carve, hollow, and polish thousands of tons of granite with extraordinary precision? Some of these surfaces are so smooth that even modern workshops need advanced machinery to achieve a similar finish. That mystery sits at the center of the entire debate. The surprising part is that researchers eventually decided to test the traditional explanation instead of simply accepting it. Using reconstructed copper tools and sand, they attempted to drill into solid granite under controlled conditions. The expectation was simple: prove that the ancient method really worked. The outcome was far less convincing. In one widely discussed experiment, after roughly 20 hours of continuous effort, the drill had penetrated only about 6 centimeters before the copper tool became unusable. The amount of work required was so extreme that one researcher reportedly summed up the experience in a single word: comical. Now compare that result with the achievements credited to the ancient Egyptians. Massive obelisks carved from single blocks weighing hundreds of tons. Granite boxes finished with mirror-like flat surfaces. More than 40,000 stone vessels, crafted with walls so thin they resemble delicate eggshells. The gap between those remarkable accomplishments and the experimental results is difficult to ignore. It was precisely this contradiction that captured Graham Hancock's attention. Between the accepted explanation and the physical evidence, he believed there was a mystery large enough to deserve much closer investigation. The man who measured everything. To understand why, we have to travel back to Egypt in 1883. An English archaeologist named William Flinders Petrie arrived with very different priorities from most explorers of his era. While others searched for hidden treasures, royal tombs, and priceless artifacts, Petrie focused on measurements. He carried precision instruments, calipers, and measuring tapes because he believed careful data mattered more than dramatic discoveries. That approach led him to notice something almost everyone else overlooked. Scattered among abandoned quarry debris were ordinary-looking granite drill cores, the cylindrical pieces left behind when a hole is drilled through solid stone. To most people, they appeared to be worthless scraps. To Petrie, they were evidence. Looking closely, he observed perfectly formed spiral grooves wrapping around the cores like the threads of a screw. The grooves were clean, evenly spaced, and astonishingly consistent. As he carefully measured their depth and spacing, Petrie reached a conclusion that surprised him. Whoever drilled these holes appeared to have cut through granite at a rate that seemed extraordinarily fast. That small piece of discarded stone became one of the first clues suggesting that something about the accepted explanation might be incomplete. A puzzle that still sparks debate. The numbers Petrie recorded continue to be discussed even today. Based on his measurements, he estimated that the drill advanced into the granite with each revolution at a speed that seemed remarkable. He argued that achieving such performance would require tremendous downward pressure, something he believed would be extremely difficult to generate using simple hand-powered tools. He estimated that the force involved could have exceeded 2 tons, applied steadily while keeping the drill perfectly aligned without shattering either the granite or the tool itself. How ancient workers could consistently produce that level of force remained, in his view, an unanswered question. There was another detail that caught his attention as well. Anyone drilling by hand naturally introduces small variations. Muscles tire, hands shift position. Pressure changes from one moment to the next. Those tiny movements usually leave uneven marks. Yet the spiral grooves Petrie examined appeared strikingly uniform from beginning to end. Their spacing remained consistent. Their depth barely changed. Each turn closely matched the one before it. To Petrie, that level of consistency resembled the kind of motion expected from a mechanically controlled process rather than an uneven human rhythm. Whether that interpretation is correct continues to be debated, but the drill cores themselves remain among the most discussed pieces of physical evidence in conversations about how ancient Egyptians worked granite, and they leave us with one unavoidable question. If these marks truly reveal a technique beyond what we currently understand, what kind of technology or method created them? The stones had more than one secret. The drill cores were only the beginning. The deeper researchers looked, the more questions the stones seemed to ask. 40,000 stone vessels that defy expectations. Museums across the world house more than 40,000 ancient Egyptian stone vessels. Many date back over 5,000 years, long before the Great Pyramid and even before Egypt's most famous pharaohs, and they continue to puzzle both archaeologists and engineers. These vessels weren't carved from soft rock. Many were made from granite, quartz, and diorite, materials among the hardest found in nature. Some have walls only a few millimeters thick, yet those walls remain remarkably uniform all the way around. In certain examples, the stone is so thin that light can pass through it. Even more intriguing is their interior. Many were hollowed through extremely narrow openings, making it difficult to imagine how conventional hand tools could have reached every surface inside. Then there's the finish. Their surfaces are polished to an almost glass-like smoothness, with little or no obvious evidence of the carving process remaining. When modern scanning technology examined several of these vessels, the measurements surprised many researchers. Some examples showed astonishing symmetry, with opposite sides matching each other within roughly the width of a human hair. One detailed analysis reported deviations of less than 15 microns across the entire form. That's an extraordinary level of precision, comparable to, and in some cases argued to rival, work produced by modern manufacturing equipment. To test whether such craftsmanship could be recreated, one experienced artisan spent nearly 2 years attempting to reproduce a single vessel using only the kinds of tools traditionally associated with ancient Egypt. Despite years of careful work, the finished piece lacked the remarkable symmetry and precision of the original. In the end, the craftswoman acknowledged how extraordinarily difficult it was to reproduce the ancient example by hand alone. That result led many researchers to ask an obvious question. If these vessels truly were made using only the simplest tools, why has recreating them proven so challenging? The engineer, who looked at Egypt differently. Most archaeologists specialize in history, artifacts, languages, and ancient cultures. Engineers, however, look at evidence through an entirely different lens. Christopher Dunn was one of them. For more than 50 years, he worked in precision manufacturing, producing components for jet engines where microscopic errors could lead to catastrophic failure. He began as a machinist apprentice in Manchester before advancing into tooling, manufacturing, and quality control. His career revolved around precision, lasers, grinding equipment, machine tools, exact measurements. He understood better than most what it takes to transform extremely hard materials into perfectly finished components. When Dunn visited Egypt, he wasn't searching for hidden treasure. He was searching for manufacturing evidence. Over roughly 3 decades, carrying precision straight edges and measuring instruments instead of excavation tools. One location fascinated him more than almost any other: the enormous granite boxes beneath Saqqara. Each weighs roughly as much as a small house. Inside those dark underground chambers, Dunn carefully measured the walls rather than simply observing them. What he recorded left a lasting impression on him. According to his measurements, some interior surfaces appeared flat within approximately 0.02 of an inch. The corners approached perfect right angles. Opposing walls appeared remarkably parallel. To Dunn, these characteristics resembled the results expected from controlled machining rather than ordinary hand carving. He later argued that some of the precision found in Egypt rivaled standards expected in modern engineering, not as praise, but as a technical observation based on what he measured. When engineers started seeing the same pattern. Christopher Dunn wasn't the only engineer to notice unusual features. As more machinists and manufacturing specialists visited Egyptian sites, many described seeing details that reminded them of modern industrial processes. They observed long, straight grooves across granite that appeared unusually consistent. They examined drill holes whose walls looked smooth and maintained nearly uniform diameters throughout their depth. They studied statues at Luxor, whose left and right sides displayed remarkable symmetry. To experienced engineers, these details suggested careful measurement and exceptional control during production. That doesn't necessarily prove the use of modern machines, but it does explain why these artifacts continue to generate debate. These visitors weren't professional treasure hunters or mystics. They were people who spent their careers machining hardened metals, inspecting tolerances, and identifying manufacturing marks. Standing before stone monuments thousands of years old, many believed they recognized patterns familiar from their own professions. As a result, several concluded that the conventional explanation involving only copper tools, stone pounders, and abrasive sand might not fully account for every feature they observed. Whether that conclusion is ultimately correct remains an open question, but it highlights just how much discussion these artifacts continue to inspire. A timeline that raises even more questions. Perhaps the most surprising part of the mystery isn't the stone itself, it's the timeline. Normally, civilizations improve gradually. Early attempts tend to be simple. Later generations refine techniques, solve problems, and produce increasingly sophisticated work. That's the pattern seen throughout most of human history. Ancient Egypt appears, at least in some respects, to challenge that expectation. The Great Pyramid of Giza is among Egypt's earliest monumental achievements, yet many researchers consider it one of the country's most ambitious and precisely executed structures. Later pyramids, despite being built centuries afterward by people who should have inherited greater experience, are often smaller, less refined, and in many cases, far less durable. To some researchers, that reversal is one of the greatest puzzles of all. Instead of a steady progression toward greater mastery, the archaeological record appears, at least in certain examples, to suggest the opposite. If that's truly what happened, what changed? And why did some of Egypt's most remarkable achievements appear so early in its history? Some of Egypt's later pyramids have deteriorated so badly that a few are barely standing today. Take a moment to think about what that suggests. If Egyptian builders gradually developed their skills over centuries, then their greatest masterpiece should logically have appeared at the end of that journey, after generations of experimentation, improvement, and experience. But the historical pattern appears to tell a different story. The most celebrated achievement, the Great Pyramid, stands near the beginning of Egypt's monumental building tradition. As time went on, many later pyramids became smaller, less refined, and often less durable. That's an unusual pattern. Normally, knowledge expands over time. People learn, techniques improve, mistakes are corrected. The curve usually moves upward. Here, at least according to researchers like Graham Hancock, it seems to move in the opposite direction. And that raises an uncomfortable question. If the highest level of craftsmanship appears first, instead of last, could later generations have been preserving knowledge they didn't originally create? That single question has driven Graham Hancock's research for decades, and his proposed answer remains one of the most controversial ideas in archaeology. A civilization before recorded history? This is where Hancock presents his most debated theory. Importantly, he does not claim to know exactly what tools were used. He doesn't claim to have discovered ancient machines or hidden instruction manuals explaining every technique. In fact, he openly admits that if such technology ever existed, it has long since disappeared. Instead, his argument focuses on something much simpler: the physical evidence, the tool marks, the precision, the measurements. Those are real. And in his view, they deserve an explanation that fits the evidence rather than forcing the evidence to fit an existing timeline. Hancock proposes that the ancient Egyptians inherited at least part of this knowledge from a civilization that existed long before dynastic Egypt. According to his hypothesis, this forgotten culture flourished before the end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago. He points to geological evidence showing dramatic environmental changes during that period. As massive ice sheets melted, sea levels rose significantly, flooding vast coastal regions where early settlements would most likely have been located. If an advanced coastal civilization had existed, Hancock argues, much of its physical evidence could now lie beneath the oceans. In this scenario, Survivors carried fragments of their knowledge to different parts of the world, including regions such as Egypt, Turkey, and South America. Rather than inventing sophisticated stoneworking techniques themselves, later civilizations may simply have inherited pieces of a much older tradition. If that were true, it could explain why the earliest examples sometimes appear to display the greatest precision. According to Hancock, the builders weren't steadily improving. Instead, they were gradually losing knowledge over generations, each century preserving only part of what came before. Why most archaeologists disagree. Mainstream archaeologists overwhelmingly reject this interpretation. They argue that the archaeological evidence does not support the existence of an advanced, lost civilization before known history. For them, Egypt's achievements are the result of human ingenuity, evolving craftsmanship, and techniques developed over long periods of time. But Hancock continues returning to what he considers the central mystery. If Egyptian engineering followed the normal path of technological development, why do some of the earliest monumental structures appear to display such remarkable precision? That question remains at the heart of the debate, because whatever the answer turns out to be, the evidence is still there, carved into stone, waiting for the next generation to understand it.